My wife smirked when I entered the police station. Then the detective went pale and whispered, "That's him?" The entire department stopped. They had no idea who I really was until the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead in the North Metro Police Department lobby, that institutional hum that sounds the same in every government building from coast to coast. My wife Veronica stood at the front desk, her manicured nails drumming impatiently on the worn Formica counter, talking to a young officer who looked fresh out of the academy. Her back was to me, but I could see the set of her shoulders, that particular tension that meant she was in full performance mode, playing the victim. When I pushed through the glass doors at exactly 2:47 p.m., she turned, and that smirk spread across her face like poison. Triumphant, vindicated, like she'd already won whatever game she thought we were playing. The desk sergeant, Officer Amy Cho, looked up from her computer screen, saw me, and her eyes went wide. Her hand froze over her keyboard. Then she reached for her phone, pressed a button, and said something too quiet for me to hear. Within seconds, a door to the back offices swung open, and Detective Raymond Kovach stepped out. He was in his 50s, built like a linebacker, with iron gray hair and a face that had seen too much. He'd been with the department for 28 years. I knew because I'd read his file. Hell, I'd written recommendations that got him promoted twice. When Kovach saw me, every drop of color drained from his face. "That's him?" he whispered to Cho, though in the sudden silence of the lobby, everyone heard it. The entire department stopped. Two officers who'd been walking toward the exit froze mid-step. The phone at the front desk rang 4 times before anyone moved to answer it. Cho was staring at me like I'd materialized out of thin air. Kovach looked like he'd seen a ghost. And Veronica, my wife of 3 years, my beautiful, lying, scheming wife, finally noticed that something was very wrong. Her smirk faltered. She looked from me to Kovach to Cho, confusion replacing that predatory satisfaction. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice sharp with the beginning edges of panic. Nobody answered her. They were all looking at me, waiting. I'd been living as Robert Fletcher, mild-mannered forensic accountant, for exactly 3 years and 8 months when Veronica walked into my life. I'd taken early retirement from my real job, bought a small house in a quiet suburb, started a legitimate consulting business, analyzing financial records for law firms and private investigators. The work was honest, boring, and exactly what I wanted after 26 years of the other thing. I told people I'd worked in corporate audit before going independent. I drove a 10-year-old Camry. I wore khakis and button-down shirts from Target. I went to the gym 3 times a week, bought groceries at Safeway, and lived a life so aggressively normal that nobody looked twice at me. That was the point. Veronica was 34 to my 52, beautiful in that high-maintenance way that requires money and effort. We met at a charity fundraiser I'd attended because my neighbor had dragged me along. She worked in pharmaceutical sales, made good money, drove a leased Mercedes, and had the kind of smile that made men stupid. I should have been smart enough to see the warning signs. The way she asked detailed questions about my finances on our 3rd date. The way she suggested I add her to my bank accounts after we'd been married only 6 months. The way she discouraged me from staying in touch with old friends, said we should focus on building our future together. But I was lonely, and she was attentive, and I let myself believe that maybe this normal life could include normal happiness. The first strange detail I noticed was 8 months into the marriage. I was balancing our joint checking account, something I did weekly out of professional habit, and found a withdrawal for $3,200 that I didn't recognize. When I asked Veronica about it, she said it was for a work conference in San Diego, that she'd forgotten to mention it. I told myself it was nothing, that married couples had expenses, that I was being paranoid. The second detail came 3 weeks later. I was looking for a stapler in her home office and found a credit card statement in a drawer. The card was in my name, but I'd never applied for it. The balance was $18,500. When I confronted her, she cried, said she'd opened it to surprise me with a vacation, but the points, and got carried away shopping. She promised to pay it off, begged me not to be angry. I wanted to believe her. The third detail was harder to rationalize. I came home early from a client meeting on a Wednesday afternoon and found her on the phone in her office, door closed. I could hear her voice through the wall, low and urgent. "He has no idea. The trust documents are already filed. Once I have power of attorney, we can move everything." I stood in the hallway, my hand on the doorknob, my stomach dropping through the floor. When I pushed the door open, she spun around, startled, then smiled that bright, false smile. "Honey, you're home early. I was just talking to my sister about her estate planning. You know how complicated that stuff is." My hands were shaking when I walked away, but I didn't confront her. Not yet. I needed to know exactly what I was dealing with. That night, while Veronica slept, I went through her laptop. I'd taught computer forensics at Quantico for 3 years, and she'd made the classic mistake of thinking a password was enough security. It took me 18 minutes to bypass her login and access her files. What I found made me physically ill. She'd been systematically stealing from me for over a year. The $3,200 withdrawal was one of 37 unauthorized transactions totaling $127,000. She'd opened 6 credit cards in my name, maxed them all out, and never made a single payment. She'd forged my signature on documents transferring my house into a joint trust, then taken out a $200,000 home equity loan I knew nothing about. Every dollar had gone into a secret account under her maiden name. But that wasn't even the worst part. I found emails between Veronica and a man named Derek Paulson, a lawyer who specialized in elder exploitation. She'd been planning to have me declared mentally incompetent, take control of my assets through power of attorney, and then bleed me dry before divorcing me. The emails were clinical, detailed, horrifying. Robert is trusting and socially isolated, she'd written. No close family, few friends. If we document a pattern of confusion and memory loss, we can establish grounds for guardianship within 6 months. Derek had responded with a fee schedule. $25,000 to file the paperwork, another $50,000 when the guardianship was approved. They'd been planning this for 9 months. I spent the next week gathering evidence like I was building a federal case, because that's what I knew how to do. I installed keylogger software on her laptop and phone, documented every conversation, every transaction, every lie. I contacted the credit card companies with fraud reports and got copies of every forged application. I pulled her financial records going back 5 years and found she'd done this before, to 2 other men. A 68-year-old widower in Oregon who'd lost his entire pension. A 55-year-old divorcee in Nevada who'd ended up declaring bankruptcy. She had a pattern, a system, and I was just her latest mark. The rage I felt was cold and surgical, the kind that makes you precise instead of reckless. I should have gone to the police immediately. That would have been the smart play, the clean play. But I wanted to understand the full scope of her operation first, wanted to make sure the case was airtight before I moved. That hesitation almost destroyed me. On a Thursday morning, 3 weeks after I discovered her laptop, Veronica announced she was taking me to the police station. "You've been acting strange," she said over breakfast, her voice dripping with false concern. "Paranoid, forgetful, aggressive. I think you need help, Robert. I think you might be having some kind of breakdown." I looked at her across the table, this woman I'd shared a bed with, and saw nothing but calculation in her eyes. "I'm fine," I said carefully. "I'm not fine with you stealing from me, but I'm perfectly sane." Her expression didn't change. "See, that's exactly what I'm talking about. This paranoia about money, these accusations. I've made an appointment with Dr. Gerald Simmons for a psychiatric evaluation this afternoon. He's expecting us at 2. Dr. Gerald Simmons. I knew that name from Veronica's emails. He was part of her network, a psychiatrist who'd sign whatever diagnosis you paid him to sign. The evaluation was a setup, the first step in having me declared incompetent, and if I refused to go, she'd use that as evidence of my deteriorating mental state. I told her I'd go to the police station first, file a report about the theft, and then we could talk about psychiatric evaluations. She agreed immediately, too quickly, and I knew she'd already planned for this. Whatever she'd told the police, whatever story she'd constructed, she believed it would protect her when I tried to expose her crimes. That's why she was smiling when we drove to the station, why she was so confident. She thought she'd already won. She thought I was just some naive accountant who'd stumbled into a trap. She had no idea who I really was, what I'd done for 26 years before I became Robert Fletcher, forensic accountant. The lobby of the North Metro Police Department was exactly as I remembered it from my last visit, 6 years ago when I'd given a training seminar on financial crimes investigation. The same scarred front desk, the same motivational posters about community safety, the same smell of old coffee and floor wax. Officer Cho was new since my time, but she wore her uniform with the stiff precision of someone who took the job seriously. Detective Kovacs, on the other hand, had been a young detective when I'd first met him, ambitious and sharp, exactly the kind of investigator I liked to mentor. I'd pulled strings to get him assigned to major cases, had written the recommendation that got him promoted to the financial crimes unit. He knew who I was. The question was whether he'd remember in time. Veronica approached the front desk with her carefully practiced distress. "My husband is experiencing some kind of mental health crisis," she told Officer Cho, her voice trembling just enough to sound authentic. "He's been making wild accusations about me stealing from him, claiming I'm part of some conspiracy. He's becoming paranoid and volatile. I'm worried he might hurt himself or someone else." Cho nodded sympathetically, taking notes. "Has he made any threats?" Veronica hesitated, then nodded. "This morning he said if I didn't admit to taking his money, he'd make me sorry. I'm frightened for my safety." Every word was a calculated lie, delivered with the skill of someone who'd done this before. That's when I walked in, right on schedule, and watched Veronica turn with that smirk. She thought this was her moment, the culmination of months of planning. The police would take her statement, probably offer to escort her to get a restraining order, maybe even do a welfare check on me that would establish a paper trail of mental instability. Then she'd use that documentation in her guardianship filing, and I'd be trapped. Except Detective Kovac had seen me, had recognized me immediately, and now everything Veronica had built was crumbling in real time, even though she didn't know it yet. "Mrs. Fletcher," Kovac said, his voice carefully neutral. "Could you step into interview room B for a moment? I'd like to get your full statement on record." Veronica glanced at me, uncertain now, then followed Kovac toward the back. Officer Cho came around the desk and approached me, her expression unreadable. "Sir, would you mind waiting in the lobby for a few minutes? Detective Kovac will want to speak with you as well." I nodded, sat down in one of the plastic chairs bolted to the wall, and waited. Through the glass partition, I could see officers gathering, whispering, making phone calls. The word was spreading. After 10 minutes, the door to the back offices opened and Captain Diana Sharp walked out. Captain Sharp was 63, 3 years from retirement, with short silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. She'd been a patrol officer when I was running the Financial Crimes Task Force for the FBI, had attended one of my seminars on money laundering investigations, and had stayed in touch over the years. When I took early retirement and moved to the suburbs, I'd had dinner with her and her wife, told them I was stepping back from that life, going quiet. She'd understood, had promised to keep my secret. Now she stood in the lobby looking at me with a mixture of relief and exasperation. "Special Agent Fletcher," she said quietly. "Or should I say Mr. Fletcher, forensic accountant." I stood up, smiled grimly. "Robert is fine, Diana. I haven't been Special Agent anything for almost 4 years." Sharp nodded. "Your wife doesn't know?" "She knows I'm an accountant. That part's true. She doesn't know about the 26 years before that." Sharp's expression hardened. "Detective Kovac briefed me on her statement. She's claiming you're mentally unstable, that you've been accusing her of theft, that she's afraid for her safety. She's asking for a restraining order and wants us to conduct a welfare check." I pulled a USB drive from my pocket, held it up. "Everything's on here. Financial records, email transcripts, forged documents, recordings of her planning this with her lawyer. She's stolen over $300, 000 from me, and was planning to have me declared incompetent to cover her tracks. This isn't her first time either. She's done this to at least 2 other men." Sharp took the USB drive, weighed it in her hand like it was evidence in a murder case. "You documented all of this yourself?" "Old habits," I said. "I spent 26 years building cases. I know what prosecutors need." She called over her shoulder. "Kovac, bring Mrs. Fletcher to interview room A, and get Detective Yoon from Fraud. We're going to need her expertise." Then she looked back at me. "Robert, I need you to walk me through everything from the beginning. Every transaction, every conversation, every piece of evidence you have. This is going from a domestic welfare check to a criminal investigation in about 30 seconds, and I need to make sure we do this by the book." We spent the next 90 minutes in Captain Sharp's office going through the evidence. Detective Margaret Yoon joined us, a specialist in white-collar crime who'd worked fraud cases for 15 years. I walked them through Veronica's operation step by step, the initial courtship designed to establish trust, the gradual insertion into my financial life, the unauthorized withdrawals that started small and grew larger, the credit cards opened in my name using forged signatures, the home equity loan she'd taken out after transferring my house into a joint trust without my knowledge, the emails with Derek Paulson planning my mental competency hearing, the pattern of previous victims. Yoon took detailed notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions. "The forged signatures on the credit card applications, do you have the originals?" I nodded. "I filed fraud reports with each company. They sent me copies. They're in the files on the USB." Sharp pulled up the emails between Veronica and Derek Paulson, read them with increasing disgust. "This is elder financial exploitation, and conspiracy to commit fraud, and identity theft. We're looking at serious felonies here." She turned to Yoon. "Can you start running backgrounds on Derek Paulson? I want to know if he's done this with other clients." Yoon was already typing. "On it. I'm also going to contact Oregon and Nevada, see if we can connect Mrs. Fletcher to those previous victims." Through the office window, I could see Veronica still sitting in interview room A, checking her phone, looking annoyed but not worried. She thought this was just a formality, that she'd give her statement and leave with her restraining order while I got evaluated for mental instability. She had no concept of what was actually happening. Detective Kovac entered the office, closed the door. "Captain, I've got patrol officers positioned outside. When we're ready to move on this, I want to make sure she doesn't bolt. Sharp nodded. Good thinking. But first, I want to hear her statement in full. I want to see exactly how far she's willing to go with these lies. They set up a video camera in interview room A and had Veronica repeat her statement on record. I watched the monitor in Sharp's office as she performed for the camera, tears welling up at the right moments, her voice breaking when she described her fear of me. Robert has always been a little odd, she said. Secretive about his past, paranoid about money. But in the last few months, it's gotten so much worse. He accused me of stealing from him, claimed I'd opened credit cards in his name, said I was planning to have him declared incompetent. It's crazy. None of it's true. I love my husband, but I think he needs serious psychiatric help before he hurts someone. The lies came so easily, so smoothly, that if I hadn't known the truth, I might have believed her myself. Kovacs let her talk for 45 minutes, asking gentle follow-up questions, letting her dig herself deeper. Then he said, Mrs. Fletcher, you mentioned that your husband's been paranoid about money. Can you describe your financial arrangement? Veronica shifted in her chair. We have a joint checking account for household expenses. Robert handles most of the bills since he's an accountant. I contribute my salary, and we split everything. Kovacs nodded. And have you made any large withdrawals from that account recently? She hesitated, just for a second. No. Well, sometimes I need cash for work expenses, but nothing unusual. Kovacs pulled out a printout of the bank statements I'd provided. Nothing unusual? Because I'm seeing 37 withdrawals over the past 14 months totaling $127,000. The color drained from Veronica's face. Those were legitimate expenses, for work, for the house. Robert approved all of them. Kovacs pulled out another document. Did he also approve the 6 credit cards you opened in his name? The ones with a combined balance of $92,000? Veronica's hands started shaking. I don't know what you're talking about. Kovacs laid out copies of the forged applications, each one showing my signature that didn't quite match, each one showing Veronica's handwriting on the account setup forms. We have handwriting analysis that matches these applications to samples of your writing. We have testimony from the credit card companies about the fraud reports. And we have emails between you and a lawyer named Derek Paulson, discussing plans to have your husband declared mentally incompetent so you could take control of his assets. Veronica stood up so fast, her chair scraped backward. I want a lawyer. I'm not saying anything else without a lawyer. Kovacs nodded calmly. That's your right. But Mrs. Fletcher, you should know that we're placing you under arrest for identity theft, fraud, forgery, and conspiracy to commit financial exploitation. You have the right to remain silent. As he read her Miranda rights, Veronica's face went from pale to red to purple. This is ridiculous. I'm the victim here. My husband is insane, and you're listening to his paranoid delusions instead of protecting me. Her voice rose to a shriek. I came here for help, and you're arresting me? Captain Sharp entered the interview room, her expression hard. Mrs. Fletcher, your husband isn't just some accountant with paranoid delusions. He's retired FBI Special Agent Robert Fletcher. He spent 26 years investigating financial crimes, including cases almost identical to yours. He knows exactly how to document evidence, how to build a prosecution, and how to expose fraudsters. You picked the wrong mark. The look on Veronica's face was something I'll remember forever. Shock, rage, fear, disbelief, all cycling through in rapid succession. FBI? He told me he worked in corporate audit. Sharp smiled without warmth. He told you what he wanted you to know. Everything else you assumed. And those assumptions just bought you a minimum of 15 years in federal prison. They took Veronica out in handcuffs through the back entrance, away from the lobby where a few civilians were waiting. I watched from Sharp's office as she screamed threats and curses, her carefully constructed victim persona completely shattered. Detective Yoon was already on the phone with federal prosecutors, explaining the case. We've got ironclad documentation, she was saying. Financial records, forged documents, email evidence of conspiracy, pattern of behavior with previous victims. This is the cleanest case I've seen in years. She glanced at me, smiled. Having an FBI agent as the victim doesn't hurt either. After she hung up, she turned to me. The U.S. Attorney's Office wants to talk to you tomorrow. They're very interested in prosecuting this as a federal case given the interstate aspects and the pattern of victims. I left the police station at 6:23 p.m., walking out into the fading evening light feeling both vindicated and exhausted. My phone had 17 missed calls from Veronica's number, all from before her arrest, plus 3 texts. Where are you? The police are being ridiculous. Call me immediately. I deleted them all. Captain Sharp walked me to my car, her hand on my shoulder. Robert, I'm sorry you had to go through this. Nobody deserves to be betrayed like that, especially not by someone they trusted. I leaned against my Camry, looked up at the police station. I should have seen it coming. I spent 2 decades profiling financial predators, and I walked right into her trap. Sharp shook her head. You wanted a normal life. You wanted to believe someone could love you for you, not for what you used to be. That's not weakness, Robert. That's being human. We stood there for a moment in silence. Then she asked the question I knew was coming. Are you going back? To the bureau? I thought about it. Really thought about it. The quiet house, the boring accounting work, the life I'd built as Robert Fletcher, forensic accountant. No, I said finally. I'm done with that life. But maybe I can consult, help train investigators on financial exploitation cases, use what happened to me to help protect other people. Sharp nodded. I'd like that. We could use someone with your expertise. The federal indictment came through 3 weeks later. United States versus Veronica Ann Fletcher, née Pearson, charged her with 18 counts, including wire fraud, identity theft, conspiracy to commit elder exploitation, and interstate financial crimes. The evidence I'd gathered became Exhibits A through R, documented with the precision of someone who'd spent a quarter-century building federal cases. Derek Paulson, her lawyer co-conspirator, was indicted separately on conspiracy charges. His law license was immediately suspended. The investigation expanded to include Veronica's 2 previous victims, who both agreed to testify. The Oregon widower, 74 now, had lost $380,000. The Nevada divorcee had lost his house and his retirement. I spent 4 days being deposed by federal prosecutors, walking them through every detail of the case. Assistant U.S. Attorney Julia Brennan, 38, 10 years with the DOJ, handled the prosecution. She was thorough, skeptical in the way good prosecutors should be, and impressed by the documentation. Special Agent Fletcher, she said during a break, I've been prosecuting financial crimes for a decade, and I've never seen a victim document their own case this well. You basically did our job for us. I corrected her gently. It's just Robert now. I'm retired. She smiled. Right. Retired FBI agent with 26 years of experience who just happened to marry a serial financial predator. What are the odds? Veronica tried to make bail, but the judge denied it after reviewing her pattern of behavior and flight risk. She'd used 7 different aliases over the past 15 years, had bank accounts in 3 states, and had a passport in a false name. The evidence of planning suggested she'd disappear the moment she was released. So she sat in county jail for 8 months, while her public defender, a young guy named Marcus, no, I need to avoid that name, a young guy named Trevor Wright, tried to negotiate a plea deal. The prosecution wasn't interested. They wanted to make an example of her, wanted to send a message that targeting vulnerable people, especially the elderly, would result in serious consequences. The trial lasted 3 weeks. I testified for 2 full days, walking the jury through the timeline of my marriage, the discovery of the theft, the evidence I'd gathered. Veronica's defense tried to paint me as a vindictive ex-husband, exaggerating normal marital financial disputes. That strategy collapsed when the prosecution brought in her previous victims. The Oregon widower broke down crying on the stand, describing how Veronica had convinced him she loved him, had moved into his house, had systematically stolen his pension and life savings before disappearing. The Nevada divorcee testified about the same pattern, the same manipulation, the same devastating betrayal. When Veronica took the stand in her own defense, she tried to claim everything had been a misunderstanding, that she'd been trying to help me manage my money, that the credit cards were opened with my permission. The prosecution destroyed her credibility in cross-examination, showing emails where she'd explicitly discussed milking the mark and setting up the incompetency play. Julia Brennan read those emails aloud in court, and I watched the jury's faces harden. The deliberation took 6 hours. Guilty on all 18 counts. Veronica screamed when the verdict was read, had to be restrained by bailiffs. The sentencing hearing was set for 6 weeks later. In the meantime, my quiet life as Robert Fletcher, forensic accountant, had become decidedly less quiet. The local news picked up the story, ran headlines about retired FBI agent exposes wife's fraud scheme. My neighbors, who'd known me as a boring guy who mowed his lawn on Saturdays, suddenly saw me differently. Some were supportive, bringing casseroles and condolences. Others were uncomfortable, like I'd been lying to them all along. I tried to explain that I'd just wanted privacy, normalcy, a break from the intensity of federal law enforcement. Most understood. A few didn't. Captain Sharp called me 3 months after the trial. Robert, I have a proposition for you. We're expanding our financial crimes unit, and we need someone to train investigators on complex fraud cases. Consultant position, 20 hours a week, good pay. You'd be based here but could work from home most of the time. Interested? I thought about the alternative, going back to my quiet accounting practice, processing financial records for law firms. It seemed empty now, hollow. What would the position entail? Sharp explained it would involve training, case consultation, expert testimony when needed. Basically, you'd do what you do naturally. Catch bad guys by following the money. Except you wouldn't be carrying a badge anymore, just helping others learn how. I accepted the position and started the following month. The work was satisfying in ways I'd forgotten were possible, teaching younger investigators how to trace shell companies, how to identify patterns of financial abuse, how to build cases that would stand up in federal court. I worked with Detective Yoon on a major money laundering investigation, consulted with the State Attorney General's office on an elder exploitation case, testified as an expert witness in 3 trials. The quiet retirement I'd imagined had transformed into something different, something better. I was using my skills to help people instead of hiding from my past. Veronica's sentencing hearing happened on a Thursday in October, the courtroom packed with her victims, their families, and reporters. Judge Evelyn Cross, 22 years on the federal bench, listened to victim impact statements for 2 hours. The Oregon widower described losing everything he'd worked for, having to move in with his daughter, the shame and depression that followed. The Nevada divorcee talked about the suicide attempt after his bankruptcy, the years of therapy, the trust issues that persisted. I gave my own statement, describing not just the financial theft, but the emotional betrayal, the violation of trust, the calculated manipulation. Judge Cross sentenced Veronica to 18 years in federal prison, the maximum allowable under sentencing guidelines. You targeted vulnerable people with precision and callousness, the judge said. You exploited trust, manufactured love, and destroyed lives for financial gain. You are exactly the kind of predator society needs protection from. Veronica was led away in handcuffs, still maintaining that she was the real victim, that I'd orchestrated everything to destroy her. Nobody believed her anymore. Derek Paulson received 8 years for his role in the conspiracy. Both would serve at least 85% of their sentences before parole eligibility. In the year following the sentencing, I sold the house Veronica had nearly stolen from me, bought a smaller condo closer to downtown, and rebuilt my life piece by piece. I started dating again, cautiously, and met a woman named Claire, who was a high school teacher, divorced, with 2 grown kids. When I told her about my background on our 4th date, she just nodded. My ex-husband told me he was a financial analyst, she said. Turned out he was a compulsive gambler who'd embezzled from his employer, so I get it. Trust is earned, not assumed. We took things slowly, built something real on a foundation of honesty. 2 years after Veronica's arrest, I was conducting a training seminar for the North Metro Police Department on financial fraud investigation when a young detective raised his hand. Special Agent Fletcher, when you were gathering evidence on your wife, why didn't you just go to the police immediately? Why spend weeks documenting everything? I thought about that night in my study, discovering the emails, the forged documents, the scale of her betrayal. Because I wanted justice, not just revenge, I said. I wanted to make sure the case was strong enough that she couldn't manipulate or charm her way out of consequences. I wanted to protect her future victims by creating a record so thorough that prosecutors couldn't lose. The detective nodded, satisfied. After the seminar, Captain Sharp pulled me aside. You know, Robert, that answer is why you're good at this. You don't just want to catch bad guys. You want to protect good people. That's what made you a great agent, and it's what makes you a great consultant. I appreciated the sentiment, but I knew the truth was more complicated. I'd been a good agent because I understood predators, could think like them, could anticipate their moves. I'd been a good mark for Veronica for the same reasons. I'd been so focused on living a normal life that I'd ignored my own instincts until the evidence became overwhelming. 3 years after the trial, I got a letter from Veronica at the Federal Correctional Facility where she was serving her sentence. The envelope had been opened and inspected by prison officials. The letter itself a single page of carefully written text. Robert, I know you won't believe this, but I'm sorry. Not sorry I got caught, though I am. Sorry for what I did. For the lies, the manipulation, the betrayal. You were kind to me, and I used that kindness as a weapon. I've had a lot of time to think in here, and I've realized that I've been running cons my whole life, even on myself, telling myself I deserved other people's money, that I was smarter than them, that they were just marks. I was wrong. You weren't a mark. You were a person who trusted me, and I destroyed that trust. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know that I see what I did finally, and I'm ashamed. I read the letter 3 times, looking for manipulation, for hidden agenda, for the con beneath the confession. Maybe it was genuine. Maybe prison had actually changed her. Or maybe this was another performance, playing the reformed criminal to set up some future appeal or early release strategy. I'd never know for sure. I filed the letter away with the other case documents and didn't respond. Some bridges, once burned, stay burned. Some trust, once broken, can't be repaired. Veronica had made her choices, and now she was living with the consequences. That was justice, clean and simple. 5 years after walking into that police station and watching my wife's smirk dissolve into panic, I stood in the same lobby accepting a civilian service award from Captain Sharp, now Deputy Chief Sharp. The plaque recognized my contributions to financial crimes investigation training and my work helping prosecute elder exploitation cases. Officer Cho, who'd been at the front desk that day, was now a detective in the fraud unit I'd helped train. Detective Kovacs had retired and was teaching criminal justice at the local university. The department had evolved, and I'd been part of that evolution. At the award ceremony, a reporter asked me if I regretted my marriage to Veronica, if I wished I'd never taken that early retirement, never tried to live a normal life. I thought about it honestly before answering. I don't regret trying to build something real, I said. I regret that the person I tried to build it with was lying from the start. But the experience taught me that you can't hide from who you are. I spent 26 years as an FBI agent, and those skills, that training, that instinct, they don't just disappear because you retire. They're part of who I am. Trying to pretend otherwise was the real mistake. The reporter followed up. Do you think your FBI background is why you survived the fraud attempt when her other victims didn't? I shook my head. I survived because I had the skills to document what she was doing and the connections to make sure justice was served. Her other victims survived too, in their own ways. They testified. They helped put her away. They're rebuilding their lives. Survival isn't about whether you fall for the con. It's about whether you get back up afterward. That night, I had dinner with Claire at a small Italian restaurant we both loved. Over wine and pasta, she asked me if I ever wondered what would have happened if Veronica had succeeded, if I'd been declared incompetent and lost everything. Sometimes, I admitted. But then I remember that she underestimated the most important thing about me, not my FBI training or my investigative skills. My stubbornness. I don't quit. I don't give up. Even when I was trying to be a normal accountant, that part of me was still there, waiting. She thought she could manipulate me because I seemed ordinary, forgettable, safe. She never realized that ordinary was the disguise, not the reality. 6 years after the arrest, the FBI asked me to consult on a case involving an organized financial exploitation ring targeting elderly veterans. The special agent in charge, a woman named Catherine Delgado, who'd worked with me years ago, called personally. Robert, we need someone who understands both the criminal psychology and the victim perspective. You're uniquely qualified. I spent 3 months on the case, helping identify patterns, trace financial flows, and build prosecution strategies. The investigation resulted in 23 arrests and the recovery of over $4 million in stolen assets. It felt like coming full circle, using my experience with Veronica to protect others from similar predators. Now, 7 years later, I live a life that's a hybrid of both worlds. I'm still Robert Fletcher, forensic accountant. I still do legitimate consulting work for law firms and private investigators. But I'm also Special Agent Robert Fletcher, retired, working as a civilian consultant for multiple law enforcement agencies, teaching, testifying, helping build cases against financial predators. The quiet retirement I'd envisioned transformed into something richer, more meaningful. I use my pain, my betrayal, my experience to protect others. That's not the normal life I'd planned, but it's the real life I've built. When people ask me about that day in the police station, about watching Veronica's face when she realized who I really was, they expect me to say it felt like victory. It didn't. It felt like grief, like mourning the life I'd tried to build and the person I'd tried to love. But it also felt like justice, clean and deserved. She'd underestimated me because I'd hidden who I was, and that hiding had costs. Not just for me, but for the future victims she might have targeted if I hadn't stopped her. The lesson I learned wasn't about trusting people or building relationships or living normal lives. It was simpler and harder. You can't outrun who you are. You can only decide how to use it. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.